Well, welcome back to the kitchen here on the Fat Daddy Sports Podcast. I am your host, Craig, and today I want to take a look at some top mistakes that I see people make year in and year out when it comes to fantasy football drafts. These are mistakes that I see in my own league. They're ones that I've read about online or seen videos about. They're ones that I just see constantly, year after year. People are making these same mistakes. And I want to give you some advice leading up to draft season so that you don't fall behind, that you don't make these mistakes and start your season off rough. You want to be prepared. You want to do your due diligence before the season starts so that when it's your time, your clock starts on your draft pick, you have no issues. You can pivot on a dime. If somebody takes the guy that you wanted right before you can look at your list or whatever it is that you have with you. You can make that pivot and feel confident with your pick. The last thing you want to do is watch that clock ticking down when it's your draft pick and panic and make a selection that's going to just derail your whole season. I see it far too often with, especially in the leagues that I'm in, guys will panic and, oh, I hit the wrong button or I hit the whatever. Very rarely do I ever let the clock run all the way down on my draft pick. I'm usually pretty prepared. I usually have a pretty good idea. The only reason I would let it run down is if I'm at the tail end of a round and I want to think about who that second pick is going to be, I'll let the clock run down on the first one so that I kind of maximize my timing to think. But for the most part, I don't like to let that clock run down, and I really don't think you should either, just because you invite a lot of other elements for your pick to go wrong. You don't want to pick super fast, but you don't want to let that clock run down either. You want to make a confident, informed decision every time you're up. And unfortunately, I see it far too often where people go into drafts and they are not prepared. So today I just want to talk about 15 or so things that I see people do wrong in the draft. Before I start, let me know down in the comments some things that you guys have seen in your drafts, where people have gone wrong, some mistakes that they make. Maybe it's something that you've done in the past that you've learned from and you want to share that. Let me know down in the comments some mistakes that you see every year on draft day, and let's jump into it. The first thing, these are not in any particular order, but the very first thing that we're going to talk about today is not mock drafting and being underprepared. So I just kind of touched on it all. If you are, say it's the morning of your draft and you're just cracking open the website that you'll be drafting on that evening, and you haven't looked at ADPs, you don't know guys that have switched teams, you don't know people that have retired or coaching changes. There's a lot that goes into a player's success year after year. It's not always the same story. You can have a guy like a Christian McCaffrey that just kind of plugs away every year and he's always is what he is. But for the most part, outside of maybe maybe just the first round, maybe the second round, there's a lot of elements that change a player's production on a season. So you look at a guy like Justin Jefferson, who was kind of the foolproof wide receiver one for a while there. Kirk Cousins leaves, they get some coaching changes, bring in some new quarterbacks, and Justin Jefferson has really struggled. Had you not known all of that, you maybe weren't leery going into the season and you confidently drafted Justin Jefferson with the number 1 overall pick. That didn't turn out well for you, and it hasn't for a couple of years. So you want to be prepared. You want to be well-versed in the mock drafting, not only for a player's sense, but websites change the way that they do their drafts from year to year. So even if you're on the same platform, whether it's Sleeper or Yahoo or ESPN or any of the other ones, they may change the way that their website works from year to year. So just because you knew how to do it last year, the button to do something may be in a different spot this year. And so you want to be prepared. You want to run those mock drafts. And if you don't know where you're drafting, you want to practice from multiple different spots so that you know what guys are going to be falling to you in what spot you'll be drafting from. If you do know where you're drafting, say you have a keeper league and you won the league last year, so now you'll be drafting from the 12th spot this year. you want to go ahead and do those mock drafts, lock yourself into that 12 spot so that you know who's going to be there at that 12, at that 13-1, and then so on and so forth through the rest of the draft. You want to know what guys, what range of guys are going to be there. It's not always going to be the same. It's not, and it's when you get into a live draft, it's going to change a little bit because real humans are drafting and real emotions come out. And so a lot of times people will take, players from their favorite team. They'll reach on them a round or two early. And so that'll throw off the whole thing. And that's what I talked about, where you want to pivot and make sure that you have your guys, you know who you want to draft, and you know what range to draft them. You don't want any curveballs on draft day, and mock drafting and watching videos like this and watching or reading articles is the best way to be prepared going into draft season. The next mistake that I see far too often is being too committed to one position or waiting too long. So, there's been a lot of make over the last few years about hero running back, zero RB, hero wide receiver, zero wide receiver, reaching for that tight end early, waiting for a tight end. Whatever it is, you can't go into your draft thinking, I'm only going to do this. I'm only going to draft running backs with my first 3 picks. I'm not going to worry about wide receiver. If there's a big run on running backs in that first, second round, you don't want to be taking a guy, reaching on a guy just because he's the first available running back. If you go into that first round and it goes, say, Bijan, Jameer, Christian McCaffrey, Jonathan Taylor, you don't want to reach on a guy like, I don't know, Devon Achane. I'll just throw out a name. You don't want to reach on a guy like that when you could have Jamar Chase, Puka Nacua, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. You have to know the tiers in fantasy football and know that, a tier 1 wide receiver is going to be more valuable than a tier 3 running back for you. You have to know those tiers. You have to be able to adapt and see those runs coming. And when the rest of the league zigs, you have to zag a little bit. The next thing is recency bias or drafting last year's stats. So I kind of talked about it a little bit ago at the beginning. There's a lot that goes into a player's productions year after year, and you can't just say they're on the same team, they have the same quarterback. You have to look at a guy like Jackson Smith and Jigba. He's still on the Seahawks, still has Sam Darnold as his quarterback. But offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak has moved on now. They bring in a new offensive coordinator. What will that mean for JSN? I don't know. I still love the talent of JSN, but I am a little bit nervous not having Clint Kubiak there because that is when JSN had his breakout, was with Kubiak last year. Ken Walker also gone. So what does that mean for the run game? What does that mean for the rest of the offense? There's a lot of question marks there that you have to be careful, especially in those first couple rounds, making a pick like a JSN when there is some cloudiness there and you're not exactly sure what it's going to look like. You have to outweigh those questions versus the talent. And sometimes the talent wins and sometimes the question marks win. You have to be okay passing up a guy and not just chasing what he did last year. There are some guys that you can look the other way and make the opposite argument, like a Christian McCaffrey, like I've talked about, a Devontae Adams. Those guys just seem to always be right there at the top. And especially a guy like Devontae Adams, if you're getting him at the right price, it probably makes sense. But you just have to look at this year's situation and make the best decision that way. All right, the next mistake that I see people make on a yearly basis is being a homer or drafting too many players from one team. So when I think about that, the first, for whatever reason, the first team that popped in my head was the Cincinnati Bengals. You could go out and get a guy like Jamar Chase, and then in the second round, you could get Chase Brown. And then in the 5th round or so, you could get Joe Burrow, and you could have the triple stack. Sometimes that pays off, and sometimes that is an absolute elite way to do your league. But it doesn't always work out like that. You probably couldn't do like Jahmyr Gibbs, Amon-Ra, and Jared Goff, because you probably couldn't get the first two on the same team. But it doesn't always work out like that. Like you don't necessarily, I don't know. A stack like that would be Bijan, Drake London, and Kirk Cousins. Is Kirk Cousins going to be an elite quarterback? Probably not. Are you an Atlanta Falcons fan? That's probably being a homer if you're drafting all of those guys. You don't always want to stack too many people on the same team. I personally don't like having the same running back and wide receiver unless they are on an absolute elite offense. That's the only way that I see it working out. I don't worry so much about the tight end in a running back. Tight end and wide receiver gets a little iffy for me. Obviously, if you want to stack your wide receiver one and your quarterback, there's some elite options to do that, and that can work out. I just get a little too worried on the weeks that are down weeks where, the offense is struggling and not scoring very much. Your fantasy team is really going to be impacted. And if you don't have an elite offense and you have that stack, they're not going to be able to sustain that for the whole season. And so if you're not an elite offense, they're not going to score enough points. It's just not going to make sense. So try not to draft too many people from the same team. I know there's those drafts out there where they draft all players from one team and see what their record could be. And those are hilarious. I love that. But if you're focusing on your main league, try not to get too many players on one team. I would say try to limit it at about 2 people. The next thing is reaching for a defense or a kicker too soon. I can't stress this enough. If your draft settings, which this is, again, you have to be prepared. You have to know what your team and your draft settings are, your league settings. If your league will allow you to not draft a defense and a kicker, I don't think that you should. I think I would rather take a swing on those training camp darlings that people are really talking about and just see how things shake out, especially if your draft is earlier in August. You never know what's going to happen. I would much rather take the swing on one of those upside guys that could, whether it's an injury, whether it's cuts, whether it's trades, whatever, it always gets crazy at the end of August in the NFL. I would rather take the upside swing on one of those players than a defense or a kicker that I'm probably going to drop from week to week anyway. And then right before that first game, I'll drop whoever those end of the bench guys are and pick up a defense and a kicker for the week. And then I'll just stream. The odds of drafting an elite defense or an elite kicker, especially an elite kicker, they vary a lot from year to year. There's a lot of things that go into it. And so you may draft thinking that you got an elite defense and you reached on them and took them in the 10th round. Well, you just missed out on a lot of value from a lot of positional players. So if you can, just wait and don't take a defense kicker at all. If you have to, take them with your last 2 picks or 2 of the last 3 rounds, whatever you want to do if you want to get a little ahead. But I would advise just staying away from the defense and the kicker. You're going to get a lot more season-long value with those high upside guys that could pop off at some point throughout the season. The next one kind of goes right in with that is you need to know your league settings. I just talked about it with what your draft settings are, but your league settings specifically, if you're going into your draft and you don't know if it's a PPR league, if it's a standard league, half-point PPR, 6-point passing touchdown, 4-point passing touchdown. If you don't know that stuff, that's going to change how you draft drastically. Certain running backs are going to get propped up or down, wide receivers up or down, quarterbacks up or down. It's going to change things a lot. You have to know your scoring format. You have to know, is this a head-to-head league? Is this a best ball league? What are we playing on here? You need to look at your settings. It takes 5 minutes to go through everything and then look at your ADPs and your players and sort it all out by that. But you have to know your league settings. The next mistake that I see people make is ignoring tier breaks or chasing position runs. So I talked about it a little bit earlier in being too committed to one position, but you have to know your tiers. I talked about having a running back in the tier 3 versus a wide receiver in the tier 1. It just doesn't make sense. You want to get the best player available, whether that means you take 3 wide receivers in a row or you take 3 running backs in a row. You want to take the best player available for your team at that time. You need to know those tiers in the positions, and you need to know, okay, we're in the 8th round. There's about to be a tight end run or a quarterback run. I don't want to be the last guy to take a quarterback. I don't necessarily ever want to be the first guy to take one either, but I don't want to get stuck in a position where it goes on a run and then I just make a pick and I don't think about it. And then I get stuck with, I don't know, Deshaun Watson as my quarterback. I don't know why that would happen, but I've seen that happen where people panic and then they just take a quarterback that they have no research on. They have no desire to have him as a quarterback, and they panic. You have to zig when they zag. Just like I talked about earlier, you have to know your league and know when they're about to go for a position, when they're not, and then you have to adjust on the fly. Going right along with that is drafting your starting lineup first. I see guys do this all the time. They'll start with a running back, then they'll go to a receiver, and then they'll go to another running back, another receiver, then they'll take a quarterback, then a tight end, then they need their flex, and they have it very regimented. This is where I'm going. And they end up just, their draft is all over the place. They're missing out on value everywhere. I've had drafts in the past where, not necessarily on purpose, but I have left the draft without a quarterback. Don't advise that at all, but man, my bench was loaded. And I was able to pick up a guy like a Matthew Stafford after the draft was over, and he worked out for me for the year. Or I leveraged him to the Puka Nacua owner, traded him in one of those high upside bench pieces, and went and got an elite quarterback. You have to just adapt. That's the moral of the story. I've said it on almost every one of these points so far. You have to adapt. You cannot just draft your starting lineup. You have to take the best player available and make that work for your roster. Going hand in hand with that is people that draft too safe. They are too cautious. They don't like taking those high upside guys, those home run guys. Last year in my main league, I drafted Omarion Hampton and Travion Henderson and caught a lot of flack from people. Omarion Hampton started the year out very strong for me as my RB2 before going down with that injury, and I had to scramble a little bit. But then Travion Henderson did kind of come on at the end of that year, and that's just that's just the way that it goes sometimes. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But if you don't ever take those high upside guys, you're going to be stuck with the DJ Moores and the DK Metcalfs and the guys that have those bigger name values and should be valuable players, and then they just kind of don't produce for you year in and year out. I think about a few years back when Kareem Hunt broke onto the scene, and he was, at the time of my draft, he was the Chiefs running back too. But being a Chiefs diehard fan, I had heard all the rumblings and knew all about Kareem Hunt. And so I drafted him, and that worked out great. Kareem Hunt was a top 5 running back that year and absolutely dominated alongside Le'Veon Bell for me. I've also taken swings on Patrick Mahomes in the past. I took a swing on Jackson Dart last year. Malik Neighbors, Jamar Chase, when his whole training camp thing was that he was dropping passes left and right. Nobody wanted him and he was worthless. And I took him and he won me a championship that first year as a rookie. So you have to be willing to take those home run swings on guys that profile good or have that hype or whatever it is. You have to be willing to take those upside swings. The next mistake that I see people is worrying about bye weeks, whether it's they have too many guys on the same bye or they have bye weeks, scattered wherever when they're playing X manager. They don't want to lose to that guy. You can't worry about that. I rarely look at bye weeks when it comes to fantasy football when I'm drafting. If all my guys are on one bye, great. It makes my season super easy. Last year, that seemed to be the case in my home league. Basically all of my starting lineup was on a bye in the same week. And I just knew going into that week that I was just going to take the loss and it just was what it was. We have very short benches in that league, and so there wasn't a whole lot that I could do without dropping some of my star players. So I just dropped a defense, I dropped a kicker, I made a couple changes here and there, and I don't think I won that week. I maybe made it competitive, but I just knew going into the season that that was going to be my week. If I can target those earlier bye weeks, that's really the only time that I focus on buys, is because if I'm trying to make a playoff push late in the season, I don't want to be worrying about my star players being on a bye in those, last, 10 week or week 10 and beyond. If I can focus on those week 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 buys, that's where I like to have my guys in buys, but it definitely doesn't deter me from drafting certain players because they have a later buy. Just kind of make a note of it, and when they do have a buys, and that's really all you need to do with it. You don't need to stress about it. You don't need to change things. Just make a mental note and move on. The next mistake I see people make is that they draft a backup quarterback too early, or just in general, they draft a backup quarterback. If you have short benches, if you're in like a 10-team league, you probably don't need a backup quarterback. There's going to be a good pool of players in the free agent list that you could pick up off of waivers anytime that could fill in for your starting quarterback. Last year, I had Patrick Mahomes for almost all of the season until he got hurt, and Brock Purdy was just sitting there for me to pick up. So I went ahead and picked him up, and he went on a just tear down the stretch and won me the championship. You can do stuff like that all the time in 10-man leagues. If you get into those bigger leagues, 14 teams, 12 teams even, it gets a little bit harder. So you do want to have that backup quarterback, but you don't want to go in and say, okay, I'm going to take Josh Allen with, my second round pick, and then I'm going to take Lamar with the next pick. I see people do that, and I see people, they think that they're going to trade one of them to somebody else and get value back on it, and that never works out. Don't be that guy that takes 2 or 3 elite quarterbacks and tries to trade them. It doesn't work. Just take the elite players around them and move on. If you take one of those elite Josh Allen type guys, you probably don't need to take another quarterback until late in the draft, like a Kyler Murray, because you're going to start Josh Allen every single week unless he's hurt or he's on his bye week. And in that case, your team's going to take a hit regardless of if, you're starting somebody else or not. But you don't need to worry about a second quarterback if you have Josh Allen. He's going to be a top 3 quarterback every single year. So you're really just picking up an insurance piece. So with maybe your last pick, you pick up a Kyler Murray or somebody of that caliber. You definitely don't need to pick up anybody else in the middle rounds to play quarterback for you. The next mistake I see people make is ignoring or worrying too much about injuries. You definitely need to make note of injuries that have happened last year that have lingered over to this year. You need to make note of anything that happens in training camp leading up to your draft. But you also can't live life worrying about somebody who is an injury risk. That's just kind of always been something that's bothered me. I hate that term injury prone for a guy like Christian McCaffrey, who has just dominated all his career in the NFL. He's been an RB1 for countless teams over the years in fantasy football. And if you are drafting scared like that, it probably goes back to that point of drafting too safe. You cannot draft according to somebody getting hurt. You can't plan for that. It's the NFL. Any player could get hurt on any play. Now, there are some guys that have had worse luck than others, but you can't plan for that. You can't plan for a torn ACL or an Achilles or whatever, or concussions, or for a guy to come in and play one play, get hurt, and miss the whole game. You can't plan for that. What you can plan for is older players that have had some injuries or have had a lot of wear on the tires, like a Christian McCaffrey, who's getting up there in age. He has had a ton of carries over the years. Those are the guys that I typically try to stay away from. It's not because of the injuries, but it's just because of the age and how much work they've gotten over the years. I steer clear of those kind of players. I prefer taking a swing on one of the younger home run guys. But hey, everybody has their own style. Another guy that I really have never had, I don't think, is Mike Evans. He's had some history with injuries. Last year, he had hamstring falling off the bone, basically. We'll see if this year, if he can play through that, or if that age is gonna hurt him. Same thing with like George Kittle on the same team, coming back from an Achilles injury, older in age. A lot of question marks there. That worries me a little bit. But, a guy like Omarion Hampton, who comes in, gets hurt last year. He's now in his second year. I'm not worried about him at all. He's young. He'll bounce back. He'll be fine. Not worried about that. Don't look at injuries too much unless the player is a little bit older. A couple more here is another mistake is falling in love and chasing sleepers. So this kind of goes hand in hand with what I was talking about earlier, is taking those home run swings on some of these younger players. A guy like Travion Henderson last year got a lot of hype in the offseason, in the preseason. And I saw a lot of people chase for him. I think I took him in the 7th round, maybe. He fell quite a bit to me, and I was able to snag him. It wasn't an explosive year by any means for Travion. Ramondre Stevenson still was there, still got a ton of work despite fumbling his job away multiple times. Travion Henderson showed a lot of things, and he had some big games, but he didn't run away with that job by any means. So if you reach for a guy like that in, say, the 3rd round, that could really derail your season. And a guy this year, Jeremiah Love, is in a similar situation, a very talented running back, very, very highly touted coming out of college, but he joins an Arizona backfield that's very crowded right now. We'll see how that shakes out as August goes on, but you got to be a little worried about guys like that when there is so many question marks and you're taking them with a higher pick. It can really derail your season very, very quickly. All right, a couple more here. The last two, not utilizing the queue. A lot of people don't even know about the queue. When I talk to them in my leagues, they're like, I never use that. I don't know what that's really there for. Hello. That is to help you so that you don't panic when that clock is counting down, like I talked about a little bit earlier. If you have your list of players they're in order of where you want to draft them, it makes it a lot easier when that clock switches to your time and you're on the clock. You look down at your queue and you say, oh, these are the next 3 guys. This is who I want. Click, boom, drafted. It makes it so much easier rather than trying to flip through the pages of players and scroll and try to figure out who you want to take. You already know. And a lot of these sites, you can do it beforehand. You could set up your queue so that as players get drafted, they remove them out of your queue. Your players are still there. It makes it so much easier on draft day to just click that name from the queue, hit draft, and you're done. You don't have to look through the pages of players and stats, and all of that can get very confusing, especially in a live draft setting, especially if you're out at a bar or something doing your draft and there's a lot of stuff going on around you. It's very easy. One place, here's all my players, here's who's up next, click it, drafted, done. And the last thing that I will talk about in this episode of the Fat Daddy Sports Podcast is drafting names over situations. I think Jeremiah Love is the big one this year. Big name coming out of college, lands in a pretty good spot for him, but they bring in Tyler Algier. They have James Conner there. There's a lot of question marks on an offense that who knows how good they're going to be with Jacoby Brissett as the quarterback. You have to be careful taking guys like that too early in the draft. If you reach on a guy like that and you miss in that name, he plays for a big team. Coming off of knee surgery in the offseason, he has gone down over the last 3 years in his fantasy points. You have to be careful. You don't want to reach and take a guy like that in the 6th round because everybody's starting to take quarterbacks. Let him fall to where you can get him at a good price and then make that pick. Maybe even as your quarterback too. You have to know the situations, and that's what it all comes back to. That's where I started this episode, was talking about being prepared. You have to be prepared. You have to know your league settings, and you have to adapt on the fly. Those are my 3 biggest pieces of advice, and that's really all I've got for you guys on this episode. Let me know down in the comments anything that I missed, and I will catch you guys on the next one. See ya.